Excellent. So welcome everyone to our rapid Q&A webinar. We're going to cover all the essentials that folks need to know about NLU, NLP, Luminoso, Daylight. We're going to cover it all today in rapid fire format. So hold on tight. Let's start with me. I'll introduce myself. First question is, who are you, Kim? I am Kim Larson. I'm a client success manager here at Luminoso. Education-wise, I have an arts degree in international studies and a science degree in economics with minors in math and business. I like to joke that I'm bad at being bored. And here at Luminoso, I've worked with hundreds of clients to translate feedback into insights and action plans. My portfolio ranges from enterprise accounts to smaller market research firms that we collaborate with and partner off with. In my experience, I work with clients from curating the prompts to finding the insights they need in their data, identifying data sources, the full range of things. So that's me. Next question is, who are you, Satoshi?
All right. Yes, I'm Satoshi Asari. I'm the Vice President of Product and Customer Experience here at Luminoso. I've held various product leadership roles for 20+ years across a whole bunch of different industries and different product categories. And my passion really is to bring products to market that deliver value, but just as importantly, that people enjoy using, right? And I think with the growth of SaaS products and more dynamic pricing models that have become more prevalent recently, the customer and user experiences are even more integral part of product success these days, right? So which is why I really like that, here at Luminoso, we've organized ourselves the way that we have, where, customer success and solutioning and product are all under one umbrella. And talking to my network, I've heard many more examples where companies have organized that way. So these days I'm focused just as much on customer experience as I am on things like product roadmaps and things like that.
Awesome, and we appreciate it. Clients like having that direct feedback line. So thank you for your work with us. Next question is, well, who is Luminoso? Luminoso was founded back in 2010 out of the MIT Media Lab. So do you want to touch on some of more of our origin?
Yeah, and I think, that PhD sort of project, I think originated with the question, is it possible to develop an AI that can understand language similar to the way humans do? So today, as Luminoso, we carry on a vision where we're trying to deliver a human-like understanding of language to drive better business outcomes, to drive business value to our customers.
Yeah, and we do that with the core competency of our debiased, domain-agnostic language understanding engine. Long slew of words. We'll touch on and break that all down in a minute with the other questions. But the takeaway for most folks is the AI learns from the language that it's fed. So it learns about your employee experience and the intricacies and the benefits that are unique to it, the culture that's unique to it. It learns about your product, a whole bunch of neat things based on what it's fed. So that's Luminoso. And so what are we covering today? We're going to be covering a lot. Like I touched on just a second ago, we're covering what is AI, what is NLU, what's the difference between that and NLP, what is Compass, what is Galaxy, what is prevalence versus frequency, how is it helping the world? We're going to be covering all of that today. So thank you all for attending on this. So we're going to start with the topics that will make you the expert in the elevator. If you haven't been in the text analytics space before, or you're new, but there's a lot of words that get thrown around and you want to be a little bit more forward on the terminology that's used in the space, we're going to cover that first to make sure that you're the experts first. So first.
All right, so let's start with the questions. Right, what's the difference between NLU and NLP? I think these are terms that we hear thrown around in various places.
Yeah, and let's start by defining it, and then I'll pass to you to explain the difference. So NLU is natural language understanding, and NLP is natural language processing. Satoshi, do you want to touch on the differences between the two?
Yeah, so I mean, a way that I've heard it described, or the differences described, is that NLP and natural language processing looks at what was said, while natural language understanding looks at what was meant. So I think, so if you have a pretty well-defined task, like you just want to count occurrences of a specific topic or something like that, NLP with some basic machine learning kind of things will likely do the trick, right? But if you're trying to discover insights from stories, like some examples might be product reviews or really truly open-ended survey responses, right? Where you have many sentences, from the respondent. Then you really need you really need NLU, the natural language understanding piece, to really dig in and understand what's being said.
Yeah, and that seems particularly important because I think maybe historically companies did not have to feel as agile as they do in 2023 and on, because things have changed really quickly in the last couple of years. Like we don't know, like the processing element seems a little bit more risky because it doesn't feel as agile as if there was an understanding baseline. But that's my bias, and we'll touch on bias as well later. Okay, what's our next question?
All right, so another term I think we hear thrown around. So what does having a domain-agnostic AI mean, or NLU AI mean?
Yeah, and we hear it because we say it. So I don't think there's a lot of folks in the space that are using the term domain agnostic. It's a term that we use. So domain, let's start by defining that because that's not a casual language word. It's the specified sphere of activity or knowledge. So the expanding domain of psychology, the expanding domain of whatever we're going to be talking about. And agnostic, not speaking to deity terms, but agnostic in the sense of having a doubtful or non-committal attitude towards something. So in this space, a domain agnostic NLU AI is an AI that understands language, and it's not siloed into a specific ontology or library or language deck. It understands the relationship between words, and it organically surfaces what is unique in that space. One of the analogies that I'll use in the training is the idea of ripped. So in a specific space, and a domain agnostic NLU is able to discern from the data if ripped genes are cool or if ripped genes are bad, like a poor quality indicator. And depending on the nature of who you're asking, what the gene language is, or the denim pants language is, it's going to be differentiated. So anything else you want to add to domain agnostic?
Yeah, and I think this kind of thing, yeah, and I think it's an important thing for people to consider, right? Because this kind of domain agnostic approach will enable analysis of a diverse set of data, different types of data. We've heard in the industry that many organizations today only really analyze a fraction of the vast amounts of text data that they have available, right? Because it's time consuming to build AI or machine learning models to suit each of those types of data. So with the domain agnostic approach, the AI can just consume any and all of the data types that you have, and you can immediately start to see some interesting insights. So I think it's definitely something to especially larger enterprises to consider, that have vast amounts of data available to them.
Yeah, enterprises and like any corporation that has a diverse portfolio. Like if you're selling, cat food and I don't know, toothbrushes, if you're selling two very different things in your portfolio, you want to be able to understand each of them in a single solution, right? Alternatively, if you're a market research firm and you're doing consultative work for cat food one day and toothbrushes the next day or whatever, you want a solution where you can learn one thing, you could trust the AI to reflect it. And I say trust with an asterisk. You want to be able to demonstrate that the AI can do what it's saying. So anyway, So I've dropped one of the words, which is, what is an ontology?
We've already said this a couple of times. So what is an ontology?
Yeah, so an ontology is like a library. So one of the things that I've seen, because I've been in the text analytics space for about 10 years, it's really common for text analytics solutions to build up a library of words. So if I own a denim company and I need to identify like ripped in this section is good, I'll program that in. Loose is good, I'll program that in, or tight is good, whatever the language of my domain is. One of our training data sets is vitamin gummies, because healthy candy, why not? The texture language, the flavor language, the packaging language, the pricing language, the quality, the efficacy, all of that goes into an ontology with a lot of solutions. And it varies, so you can either build it yourself and
right, yeah. And in many cases, the quality and performance, of a typical text analysis solution is highly dependent on this ontology, right, which is human generated. So I think whenever you're looking around for solutions and you hear the word ontology, you should sort of raise your antennas and should make you ask some questions, right? Because the ontology, based approach sort of forces or results in the text analytics solution, sort of focusing on what's represented in the ontology, and you can end up missing some really important, interesting things that are present in the data, but are not represented in the ontology itself. So
yeah,
definitely something to think about.
Yeah, and I think we saw that in early 2020 when the pandemic started to roll in, like the thunder in Satoshi's background. And the language around it kind of, it varied, right? It was a new thing, it was a novel thing, and it showed up in everyone's data sets and how people were describing it based on their, anyway, we'll touch on all that later, but ontologies, check. So next question is, how does
AI work?
Yeah. So I'll give a quick summarized answer and then I'll pass it to Satoshi again. AIs work by learning from the data that it's fed. The more data that it's fed, the more consistent the results. And I say consistent instead of better, because if you have consistently biased data, you're going to create a consistently biased AI. And this one we say just like a person. If a person is raised with a specific perspective on like, I believe that skinny jeans are the only type of good jeans, it's going to be biased in that direction. And that's something to keep in mind when working with AIs. So if you have a good pool of data, you're going to have a good AI result. But you want to get more technical, Satoshi?
Right. Yeah, so it's important to feed the AI good data, as Kim you just said, right? And one that's relevant to the task at hand. But I think you want to provide that data in a way where the AI can sort of connect that data and learn to interpret the language, right? So just like humans, if you only expose a human child to a very specific set of things, then that would be sort of the full context within which that child is able to learn and extrapolate, right? So we'll talk a little bit more later about the approach that we've taken at Luminoso, to try to accomplish this.
Yeah, that sounds good. So that covers our technical bit. If there are additional questions, feel free to shoot us at Luminoso an email or a LinkedIn message or whatever. We're happy to answer those questions as well. But let's roll into how AI and text analytics is making a difference, because it is being picked up everywhere. It's one of those emerging markets. So let's touch on that for a little bit. So
how is text, like you said, how is text analysis making a difference in the world today?
Yeah, so it's everywhere. It's available and applicable wherever stories are being told and need to be understood. And it's not possible to process it all by hand. So, companies with hundreds, thousands of employees, hundreds of thousands of employees, they need to be able to understand the unique employee experiences in order to make systemic improvements, there's always some ground level idea where someone who's, boots on the ground, they're going to be seeing systemic challenges and differentiators in ways that people in a siloed in a headquarters corporate office may not see. I think Walmart had an example of this with the like adding a step stool to the truck. Like it was a small change, but it increased efficiency. The guy got an award. I think that was fairly recently. And that's only possible when you have a good employee experience EX program that's listening to the employees and improving their quality of life, reducing churn, etc. It's available in the CX space. So voice of the customer, product reviews, surveys, support calls. Those are all stories being told that need to be synthesized and understood by people who are making decisions. We have a previous webinar series on the importance of listening in order to improve quality. We are in voice of the industry, so market research surveys, folks who are innovation focused, thinking about the what ifs, and thens, what thens, and social media scrapes, so where the ideas are emerging, where people are reacting, responding, all of it storytelling. Even in the more technical side with manufacturing troubleshooting notes, and this can go into diagnostic and medical fields as well, but if someone's describing their problem, there's a rattling in the front left side and it rings when I shake it or something, whatever that description is, having the AI be able to grasp that and then pair it off with the description of how it was fixed previously, so people aren't reinventing the wheel every time there's an issue down the manufacturing line. So it covers a lot.
Yeah, and those are just some examples, right? There are many other uses, for text analytics, and I think unstructured text data, right? We've read, we've heard from analysts, is among the fastest growing and most underutilized assets that are available to businesses today, right? And so, so a good AI text-based text analytics solution can really be used at scale to help these businesses make more use, and find the insights that are present in these, in these mounds and growing mounds of, unstructured text data.
Yeah, and I think we've argued previously, like it's essential to be asking the widest group of people the broadest sorts of questions of meaningful importance in order to get those ideas. I think when we seek scalability, a lot of folks will default to answers that can scale well, and that kind of sabotages the quality of the insights. And if they're looking for more in-depth questions, they're narrowing the scope down to a manageable size because scalability is a challenge with open-ended text. But that's how text analysis. So we've touched on it a bit, and I don't want to make sure we're highlighting things like, and I'll snag this question and read it myself. How do organizations use text analysis to understand employees? We gave one example previously. And I'm guessing if you're attending this webinar, you are an employee or seeking to be an employee somewhere. Employment's pretty common for folks who attend company webinars. And we want to make sure that, like, individually, like, employees have a high quality of life. So we've seen folks who use AIs have a sense of relief of being able to outsource the grunt work of reading hundreds, thousands. We've heard what I would consider horror stories of, like, you had to sit down and read how many surveys, you came in on the weekend and they gave you pizza. No. So there's that side of it, the analyst side of it, being able to process that data and outsource it so that way you can dive into the more interesting nuggets, have the mental bandwidth and not having the fatigue to come up with creative action plans. Because if you're burning out on reading everything manually, or if you're asking really mundane questions where it's scalable to understand but not a good quality of employee life, we make a difference on that side, on the user analyst side, but also on the HR side. So when HR looks at performance reviews, we've had a case study where we the client uploaded their performance reviews, and they had some demographic data, and they could do unique to female employees versus unique to male employees, and they identified some pretty stark, managerial gender bias regarding what the feedback for the female employees were versus the male, and it was systemic. It surfaced really starkly, and that gave them an action plan that they could then respond to and work on for a while. That's a tough problem to tackle, but I would say it's worth tackling. Alternatively, we also have clients who do employee satisfaction surveys. So, every year, quarter, they'll pulse, how do you feel about the company? How do you feel about your manager? How do you feel about your compensation, et cetera? And with some of the satisfaction scales, they can say, well, what's unique to the 1-star satisfaction employee experience? One time, like a manager's name came up. That is a problem. When managers come up as unique to 5-star reviews, also very good and interesting. Act on that, recognize that, learn from that. And there's been some unique evaluations like benefits. So if someone is a disgruntled employee and they're saying, I don't like X, Y, Z, I'm only here because, that is an interesting thing that we can use when we cross-analyze the drivers with sentiment, and we will touch on all of that later. But info dump, it makes a difference for employees, and it's good and encouraging to see.
Yeah, and I think from a management, persona perspective, right? I mean, I think it's important to, I think all companies do these kind of surveys and whatever, but I think it's important to be able to collect data that's really sort of, telling what the stories that the employees want to tell, right? And be able to do that in a way that they feel safe and anonymized or whatever. But then at scale, you need some technology to help you really, understand, the insights that are in that information, right? So.
Yeah, shout out to Garrett's webinar on unionization on that one. That was a good callback. All right, so that's one use case, or one way we're seeing text analytics kind of change the world a bit. The next one is, how do organizations use text analysis to understand customers? There are so many use cases in this category, because when people buy things, I think the organizations are very interested in what customers have to say, which is great. It's really important to understand the customer experience, and it's kind of captured along the life cycle, right? It's innovation, it's, on launch. I think we have a webinar coming up in January about, customer experience at times of launch. There's loyalty programs, there's how do you expand your customer base, all these objectives, and with that, all the data sources that go with it, right? There's product reviews, there's research surveys, there's formula changes, there's ad campaign research, there's marketing SWOT analysis, so strength, weakness, opportunity, strengths when you look at the competitor pool. There's tracking studies to make sure that formula changes aren't disrupting the loyalty chain. There's tracking studies to track market changes outside of the customer's control, kind of within that SWOT analysis. But with all the things going on, like, yeah, the pandemic is one example, but we're also seeing disruptions because of social media, executive change, resulting in pharmaceutical stock price changes. Like, it's just, there's so much going on to keep a pulse and a tab on. And in-depth interviews are another one. Focus groups. We talked to Jim recently about how focus groups and interviews can be factored into text analysis. Satoshi, what am I missing? There's undoubtedly more.
Yeah, I'm sure there's infinitely more, right? But, support ticket or support center interactions could certainly be insightful. Obviously, a lot of companies do NPS surveys or CSAT surveys. But I think the point is, the touch points that businesses have today with customers continue to grow and expand. And going back to something you said a little while ago, right? Unstructured text data is among the fastest growing assets that businesses have, right? So there's many, many different ways that you can use, that data to better understand your customers and, make them happier, grow your business, and all that happy stuff.
Yeah, yeah. So there's always the bottom line and the altruistic, but ultimately everyone wants the customers to be happier. All right, so next we have, you can ask the question this time. How do
organizations use text analysis to streamline manufacturing or deal with manufacturing like issues?
Yeah, and I like the manufacturing like issues because it's surprising how many organizations, departments, and workflow use that kind of manufacturing process in other ways. So first I'll touch on what this use case kind of goes over, and then I'll let you expand into it. So, and I think we touched on it a second ago, but production line folks can write up what they're observing when a thing doesn't pass QA. We referenced the rattling in the front engine earlier. And the AI can identify, or at least ours can, like what are synonyms or things mentioned in conjunction with rattling in the pool of QA troubleshooting notes previously. And that's tied to a previous solution. So it can surface what is mentioned when addressing that in previous language without having to use the terms exactly. Because the way I would describe an issue, and I think people can tell from the webinar, is not going to be the same way that Satoshi describes an issue, right? We're going to have different language, different approaches, even if we're describing the same exact thing. So you want to summarize?
Yes, I mean, I think we do have a case study published of the use case that Kim just described, right? So that is with a manufacturing company. But I think sort of taking a step back, it's really about the use case is really about being able to effectively search, within a large knowledge base. So manufacturing issues could be one. Custom sales orders is another one. That's another use case that we have with another one of our customers. So it's just, so searching through vast, knowledge bases where you have many, many different authors that may say things differently, as Kim just described. So having a natural language understanding capable, text and analysis solution can really help you streamline and build out a good search experience for your users.
Yep. All right, so I think the next one is, how is NLU being used by market researchers? We have a video with Satoshi here and Jim from Reality Check on retiring the focus group and using advanced qualitative research methods. So that's one way that they've been doing it. I highly recommend going and watching that webinar. There's Q&A at the second half where I get to chime in, but it was really good, and it covered a bit like the nature of focus groups. In a focus group, as a common research methodology, is people will say things that align with how they want to be perceived. So if I'm in a group, I'm going to be putting my best foot forward. It may not necessarily reflect what my actual predictable behavior is going to be. I think an example that had come up in our pre-discussions with Jim is like recycling. Like if we have a focus group about recycling, everyone's going to be like, yes, I recycle and I clean my recycling before I put it in the bin, and I only recycle recyclable things. But when it comes down to behavior, we may not see that. We may see the dirty things going to the recycling. We may see things that are misclassified because it was made of plastic. What do you mean it wasn't recyclable? And it can change. So if folks are more candid, if folks have a more targeted survey that can streamline with behavior, that influences. That's just one way market researchers have been using us. Similarly, we work with MAI Research in our last November webinar series, and they really dive into the engine. They hook into the API endpoints, they look at the vectors, and they create really unique subset analysis with their metadata. And They create Bayesian networks, and they really explore what drives customer behavior in ways that are tied to what they say, but not exclusive to what people say. It doesn't trust people to be that honest or that self-aware. It really, they do a fantastic job. So Satoshi, what else have you seen with market research?
Yeah, and I think there's really an opportunity for market researchers to set themselves apart, right, by leveraging NLU and other technologies. But they allow them to add both scale and rigor to what they already do so well, right? The market researchers, they're good at finding stories, uncovering the voice of the market or the audience. And NLU and technologies like that really enable them to do that at scale across more data, more more people, more respondents. So instead of having to focus on 10, 20 in-depth interviews, you can go and gather hundreds, if not thousands, of stories. It just adds a lot more credence to the findings, right?
Yeah, credence, because you're asking a diverse portfolio of folks. If you're asking, a dozen people with, similar backgrounds or, in a similar cultural group, you're going to be missing on the nuances that come from having a comprehensive pool of data. Inclusivity is one of those things that we touch on pretty regularly, because having a de-biased AI allows us to lean into that. So yeah. Good point. And I will touch on, well, how do I make a difference with my data? Because we talk about it a lot, and I think a lot of folks fall into one of those categories previously of working with employees, working with consumers, working with prospects, working with manufacturing notes. And one of the things that I think Garrett highlighted really well in the unionization webinar, in the Q&A at the end, he's like, you got to tie it to money, right? Because if you're doing something with, if you're going through all the effort of gathering these insights, and you're doing the research, and you have the highest level of integrity on the research approach, if it's not translating into something that makes a difference to the internal stakeholders who supply the market, which is often like the CEOs, the product managers, the support managers, politicians, whoever's holding the control, if it doesn't result in them doing the right thing afterwards, it's going to be really challenging to make a difference, right? Because they're not doing anything. So it needs to be aligned with their objectives, resulting in the right questions being asked, resulting in true reflective feedback being said by the external stakeholders and the market demand, whether that's employees, consumers, etc., which then translates into insights. And that can be really tough because, as we mentioned, people don't always say what their behavior reflects. They have an idea, they have a level of self-awareness, but it may not be a complete level of self-awareness. Satoshi, how do you make a difference with our data? Do you have a stab there on? Because I think you.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important. Yeah, I think it's important to have objectives in mind, right? So you're not just looking at the data for the sake of looking at the data, or you're not looking for the AI to magically tell you something that you didn't know you were looking for, or whatever. So I mean, I think you want to make sure that you're connected to your stakeholders, you have clear business objectives in mind, that then you can structure a project or a plan around how you're going to find answers to those questions through the text data.
Yeah, and since Satoshi won't brag on himself, Satoshi takes our client feedback surveys with satisfaction, promotion, effort, and confidence scores, takes that feedback, runs it through our engine, and sets our roadmap based on that, and prioritizes, like, how bad is this issue? It's coming from the customer. Some of it gets piped in and advocated through our CSM team. But I think Satoshi particularly is, like, as a stakeholder, as one who decides our customer experience and product roadmap, very interested in what our customers and clients have to say. So big thank you to our clients who provide their feedback. even if Satoshi doesn't admit how much he uses it, I can confirm he does. So next question, now that I've embarrassed my manager. Why use Luminoso for text analysis? And I'll chime in, and then I'll pass the mic to Satoshi once he's recovered. I would say our clients use Luminoso, use us for text analysis because those use cases matter. And because those use cases matter, because employees matter, because customers matter, because innovation matters, because streamlining and quality assurance matters, the results and the research integrity matters. It's not a checkbox of, have I done my text analysis? Cool. Am I meeting that check mark of my personal evaluation? That's not enough to cut it for most of our clients. And they value our AI because it's objective. It doesn't have a preconceived notion of the service being good or bad. The data surfaces whether the service is good or bad. It makes those associations. It surfaces names of individuals who have stacked the data in their favor, and it surfaces some really interesting actionable stuff. And it does the grunt work, right? It's annoying for a person to have to read no comment, NA, it was fine. You read through it and you get tired. But when you have an AI, the more that it's fed, robots don't get reader fatigue. More reading makes the robot happier and more accurate. So the longer the stories, the more product reviews, the more of the market that it understands, the better the results. It's a really good use of robots.
Yeah, one of the keys to Luminoso solutions is that it learns on the fly. We'll talk about a little bit of this in the next section, but it learns on the fly from the data that it's being provided, and it has two key important benefits, right? So one is that because it's just learning on the fly, there's no setup time, right? So you don't have to set up the ontologies like we talked about earlier or anything like that. So you literally upload the data, wait a few minutes, and then you can start discovering insights. And the other, as Kim has touched on a couple of times, is it reduces the impact of the human bias, right? Which is often introduced into the process, within that setup training, phase of the project. So.
Yeah, and that's not just on the analysts either. There's going to be other text solutions that are being offered, and whoever set up those decks, whether it's in the consumer side or in the vendor side, if it's an ontology-based solution, there's a very strong potential for human bias there too, because someone's going to be making the discernment on how important is quality to a thing. How important is design to a thing? Someone's making that decision. In this case, we've taken it out because it's just the baseline understanding of what do words mean and what is their relationship to each other. So kind of neat, and lends itself to our technical side. And eventually, once we cover this technical side, we'll go into some of the daylight UI stuff and the specific questions that we get there. But let's touch on.
Yeah, and a quick time check. We're probably gonna have to go a little bit faster now.
Okay, we'll have to go a little bit faster. We just get so excited. All right, so first, what is ConceptNet? My baseline understanding for ConceptNet is it's the baseline understanding of what words mean. You can check out ConceptNet maybe on your own, but Satoshi, I'll let you summarize it real quick.
Yeah, so it's really a crowdsourced project that originated out of the MIT Media Lab, right, which really is the origin of Luminoso, the company. It's freely available, and basically it's really the goal of the ConceptNet is to represent how humans use language, natural language, in a way that can be used by computers. So yes. That's it in a nutshell, I think.
Yeah, next, what is QuickLearn? QuickLearn is our proprietary engine that bridges your data, whatever the data is being fed with, to that ConceptNet stuff.
Right, so QuickLearn is the AI, right, the foundation of Luminoso's text analytics product. So it's based on a transfer learning AI technology that combines the background space, that's derived from ConceptNet, right? So this is how people speak languages. And then it combines that with the text data that you want to analyze. And then that results in a language model that is generated by QuickLearn that is specifically tuned to your data, right? So this means that it can understand domain-specific words, that are sort of uniquely present in your data or in wherever you operate. But it can also understand generally used words, both sort of in its context, in its proper context, right? So with this ability to create this project-specific language space on the fly, it eliminates the setup time and all that kind of stuff. And then it also, reduces the effect of any preconceived notions that you might have, right? And it really sort of objectively surfaces the information that's present in the data.
Yeah. So, and real quick, because you're the one that reminded us to be cognizant of time. Compass is our automation and triage tool. So classifications, tagging, routing, it learns from a pool of data. Like this ticket is a bug support, this ticket is how to, this ticket is billing, this ticket is login, and it learns from that data and is able to sort it really, really quickly. So gaming company support tickets, actual physical email support things. It covers a lot. Anything I missed there, Satoshi, on what Compass is?
Yeah, no, I think it's most commonly used in automating, support center or support ticket systems, but, it can really be used anywhere where, you want to automate or add automation to a workflow that requires tagging or classifying of that.
Yep. All right, then what is daylight? It is when the sun comes up. No, it is also our discovery tool. It is our most, popular used product. It's the one that we'll be going over with more specificity real quick in just a minute. Stories go in and insights are illuminated. Without daylight, researchers can be effectively searching in the dark, just navigating with familiar pathways and then tripping over surprises. And we don't want that. We want people to be able to see what they're doing and make cognitive informed decisions.
Right, so daylight allows you to, discover the stories that live within your data, like we've already said a few times, and then turn them into quantifiable findings and actionable insights, right? So there's a sort of a discovery part, exploration part of daylight, and then sort of, more of a quantification, results-oriented part of daylight, which Kim will go into in more detail shortly.
Real fast. So I may be asking and answering my own questions for this next bit because this is the questions for the new users. First question, how long does it take to learn daylight? That's a big it depends. It depends on your data style. Support tickets are going to be different than product reviews. It's going to depend on your objectives. Are you looking for the way people describe things, or are you going to be looking for finding emerging issues? Are you looking for innovation? Are you looking for competitor data? And it depends on your skill and time investment available to the product. So some folks will get what they need from this webinar alone as fast as we're going to cover it. It's going to be like 15 minutes. And other folks need to work with partners to bounce ideas off of. If they're doing survey creation, it's helpful to bounce ideas off of like, well, how do I phrase this question so that people are giving me storyful data and not the shortcut answers? And data cleanliness, quality. Is it going to be really typo filled, or are people being articulate and spelling things correctly and in consistent ways to make those associations stronger? Satoshi, anything you want to add to how long it takes?
Yeah. And I think it depends on your mindset as well, right? So AI is not magic. You can't just think the question and expect it to give you the answer, right? So so you have to have, as we mentioned earlier, clear objectives of what you're trying to accomplish, and then really think of the AI and the text analysis solution as a partner that you're working with together. All
right. Next is, what languages does Luminoso support? Luminoso supports 15 languages natively, which means we don't do any translations. If your data is in Spanish, the insights will be in Spanish, the associations will be in Spanish, because those are different from the words in English. Sometimes between languages, there may be one word in one language that has 15 nuanced alternative words in another language that are commonly used. And to preserve the integrity of the data, we don't want to touch on that. If folks choose to translate it beforehand or afterwards, that's an analyst choice, analyst decision, but we process these languages natively to preserve the data integrity. Next is, what does Daylight do? Daylight surfaces what's in the data. So concept relationships, what's the relationship between fast and service and friendly and service? How common are these concepts? How often are people mentioning friendly versus how often are people mentioning rude? And the so what. So we have drivers and sentiment. We'll touch on each of those in just a second. And if you have metadata, additional metadata, we can also utilize my personal favorite functionality, which is unique to filter. So what is unique to women, what is unique to men, what's unique to 5-star reviews, unique to 1-star reviews, etc. These are the core functionalities of Daylight. How can I understand, or how do I know that Daylight understands my data? Because domain agnostic sounds a little fishy to a lot of folks, and we put it forward. We put it forward, this is what your data is saying. In the highlights page, it's the quick pulse. So here's a quick scrape of WebMD focus and antidepressant medication, and we can see what's on top here. This is about medication for these things with dosages and side effects, and then we have the so what's at the bottom. We can see mentions of awful and terrible with low scores, no side effects, much higher scores than on average. If you have no side effects, the thing works, happier prescription experience. And concept level sentiment, because sometimes the drivers and sentiment don't align, and that's worth looking into, because you find out what the fly in the ointment is one of the phrases, or what's that saving grace. So capture all that, put it together. Next, what is Galaxy? Why would we, a text analytics company, name a functionality Galaxy? So Galaxy is one of our, I would consider it like a varsity tool, because it's the 2D window of the vector engine underneath the hood. So it's a window into the science that is dictating the product. Concepts that are closely related have similar vectors, and they will stick together pretty closely. So if we imagine like moons orbiting planets as they go around the sun, there's a gravitational pull that pulls the things together. You know, some planets have many moons. It's going to pull in all of that language together. So here we see the dosages together, the symptoms and side effects together, and then the efficacy language together. It's all kind of split into themes naturally based on the vector relationships between the concepts. So in drink reviews, this can look like flavor descriptions together separate from the visual descriptions, you know, chocolate and citrus and whatever flavor descriptions separate from amber, hazy, bubbly, foam, etc. In retail feedback, we'll see service separated from product descriptions. So, you know, front desk was friendly, but the room was dirty. They're separate descriptions, and they'll naturally kind of cluster together. Satoshi, anything you want to add here?
Yeah, and I think you know, in this feature, here's where we're really allowing the data to tell the story, right? So as Kim just brought up, you know, it's sort of telling you what concepts or what topics are closely related to each other, which ones are not. And oftentimes, you know, the concepts that you know, the Galaxy will tell you are related or not surprising. But there are definitely many occasions when you do uncover things that you did not know before, right? So from a product perspective, for example, we might do, you know, a product survey or something like that. And, you know, there were times when you're surprised at how often users are talking about the, you know, two different features, two seemingly unrelated features in conjunction with each other, right? And so that will, those kinds of things can really drive things like UX design, right? Where you're now taking into account the fact that feature A has a big impact on feature B, you know, and you have to sort of think about those kinds of things together. So that's an example of how, you know, this kind of visualization could be useful.
Yeah, and I think Galaxy deserves its own masterclass webinar. So if you want that, shoot us an email, let us know, and we can talk about Galaxy on its own for probably an hour. So next is, what do the colors in Galaxy mean? So this depends on the view settings, but the colors generally convey themes. So the geographical location here represents close associations, but so does the color pigment bleed. So in this case, I have dropped pigment around like dosages in green and prescription in blue, and then side effects in yellow, and then symptoms in purple and diagnosed in red. And we can see that the dosage and the medication kind of bleeds around, whereas in the diagnosed section, there's not much color bleed. And that can help kind of add a layer of narrative or story based on that. And it can be anything you want to drop pigment into. So if you want to drop pigment into excellent and another one into terrible, the association score will dictate that color bleed. Again, this feature really does require its own masterclass at some point. Next one, what does the font size in Galaxy show? The font size reflects prevalence, so how uniquely common something is. What's the difference between frequency and prevalence? Frequency is how often something is mentioned, and prevalence is how often something is mentioned compared to how often we would expect it to be mentioned. So here we have 3 pedestrians and 1 unicorn. The frequency is 3 for pedestrians, 1 for unicorn, but the prevalence of unicorns is uniquely common. Like I'm going to be talking about the unicorn I saw today, not the 3 pedestrians. And we use that to surface what's important to a specific data set. So if your data set's about medication, it's going to be those medication terms. It's about vitamin gummies or flavor, it's going to surface that first. And that helps streamline the user analysis. It prioritizes what makes your data set unique. How do I know what's in my data? So this is volume. This is what people who are used to coding things manually think of mostly. They're like, well, how often were the things mentioned? That is my story. Sometimes. So we filter based on prevalence and then rank in order of frequency. So if you're building libraries and ontologies with brute NLP solutions, you're gonna be asking how common things come off. We surface that in volume to help kind of bridge and make that easier. There's volume. What are conceptual matches? Because in this one, we have exact matches in dark blue, conceptual matches in light blue, and you'll notice they kind of offset and complement each other. So what are conceptual matches? Conceptual matches are the concepts with high associations with other concepts, often used similarly or in conjunction with. So similarly lets us catch some of those euphemisms or spelling errors, and used in conjunction helps us identify. So if there's a string of words used to describe service, it's going to pull those in and make that association score higher. In this case, we have focus as an exact term, but there's a whole list of ways that people are describing focus in the ADHD prescription medication world. They're accomplished, they're motivated, helps me focus, concentration, attention. And then there's more complex things like these collocations like changed my life in 3 years, or took this for 3 years and it changed my life. Wonderful, miracle, feel normal, saved my life, lifesaving. Like these are significant things that are pulled in. I don't think I could come up with every way that someone with a significant, like, you know, Barry, like if you're dealing with depression or if you're dealing with focus challenges, change my life is big. I could not come up with every way someone's going to describe that. And I wouldn't want that on me. I want the AI to figure out what that is and surface it. And it's going to vary from data set to data set. So I just use the word collocation. What is the collocation? A collocation is a linguistics term for the habitual juxtaposition or comparison, you know, putting it together, of a particular word with another word with a frequency greater than chance. Changed my life, miracle drug, lifesaver. It's 2 words. If you're looking up miracle, that's different from miracle drug, right? Because one is the prescription and one is divine intervention. Changed my life. There's lots of things that can change. You can change the dosage, but changed my life is a really unique thing.
Yeah, and they like will automatically find, you know, the collocations that do, you know, occur more frequently than by chance, as you know, as Kim described. So, and then it'll, as you can see here, it'll surface it as a concept, and you can do all the the quantifiable, you know, analysis for that collocated phrase as well.
Yeah, I would say I don't do any work on the analysis. I didn't make this ontology, right? The AI is surfacing it. This is a straight screenshot from the product. So we don't have to do much for that. So how can I evaluate the content in my data? So we covered what's in my data, what's being said, what's associated with what, but often business users want to see, well, the so what. So here we use drivers, unique to filter again, and concept level sentiment. So that's covered in the highlights page. How does unique to filter work? So unique to filter takes any of your subsets and it compares them to the rest of the data set or the rest of the domain, and it surfaces it kind of like prevalence. And that allows users to see, like, well, what's unique to 1-star reviews? They're mentioning very specific size issues, packaging issues, melting issues. What's unique to 5 stars? It's usually mentions of great service. They're not getting into the details of the product. What are men saying that women aren't? If there's nothing, if they're speaking about the thing the same way, unique to filter is not going to surface anything because they're talking about the same way. Perks of using an AI, the AI can't lie. And it's going to surface that, like, okay, there's equitability there, that it's even. And it allows you to kind of surface, well, what was unique to this time period? Yeah, it works similar to prevalence. It compares what is normal, what is happening everywhere else. It's that same transfer learning skill. So how does drivers work? Drivers looks at that open-ended feedback and it reads like if they mentioned concept X, like brain zaps or withdrawal, the average satisfaction rating was X. So it pairs that verbatim with the metadata and it takes the average. Makes sense, pretty intuitive. In this one, it's stating the obvious to demonstrate that it works. But then you can take it and look at more objective things like service. If they mentioned packaging, if they mentioned delivery times, to see on average how that specific metric is going, which may be less obvious and potentially more actionable. So then we have concept level sentiment. This is a unique sentiment approach where it evaluates each individual concept that is mentioned in the reviews. So if someone mentioned no side effects, on the majority case, it's generally a positive thing in this data set. Changed my life, generally a positive thing with pharmaceuticals, but that may vary for a different case. Like if we were working with, I don't know, like overdue income collections, there's ways that people can have their life changed for not the better. In this data set, changing life was. Similarly, zaps. If in this case, the focus medication zaps, negative thing. If I was working with an electric thing and I wanted the thing to be a like battery zapper thing, it's probably gonna be positive. It's gonna vary based on the data set. Fixed was another one. Fixed bugs, good thing. Fixed a dog from a breeder, pros and cons. It's gonna vary depending on your objectives, right? So if you wanna learn more about concept level sentiment versus document level sentiment and why we've invested in concept level sentiment and all the computing power that goes into it, I highly recommend watching the webinar series that we did with MAI Research that goes into why we use concept level sentiment and all the ways that you can cut and slice and dice it and present it to internal stakeholders for a compelling narrative. How do you balance boring and relaxing? We cover that in that webinar as well. So 1 minute, leveling up your NLU game. How can researchers approach feedback that isn't in English? We process it natively, which allows the researcher to make that decision on their own. Some of our users translate it pre-analysis, and they put a lot of trust in their translators to be honest and uphold the integrity of the data. We have other clients who translate post-analysis and allow the engine to find those differentiated terms and troubleshoot that way. People can go both ways. It's also important to recognize the resources you have available. Do you know the languages? Is there someone available who does? Processing it natively is the best way to preserve the integrity of the data. And we also want to make sure that we're recognizing the benefit, because sometimes there's a benefit to putting all the language data into a single pool and analyzing it all together versus separately. This is when I would say, talk to your CSM, let us consult with you and determine what the best workflow for your use case is, because it varies. How can I optimize my research interviews for NLU processing? We recommend two methods, and kind of pick one, don't do a hybrid approach. One is a therapist approach, kind of like a product review where the moderator dictates like when has something been addressed or what needs to be further elaborated on, with the moderator's role primarily being, you mentioned X, go on, and no leading the witness, letting the respondent give the fullest story possible. On the other side, there's also the survey heavily structured side. So describe packaging, let them go off and kind of, slight encouragements, but the entire context of what the person is saying should be contained within their verbatim, moderator with pull or withheld, and the question then goes into the metadata. There's a role for moderators. There's definitely a role for interviews. But talk to us and we can do individual coaching, or let us know if you'd like us to do a webinar on that later. What are the pros and cons to integrating an AI into businesses? Big pro is scalability, quality of life, data integrity. The con is AIs learn from the data that they're fed. So if your data quality is suboptimal or not reflective of the objective, the robot's not gonna know that. It's just gonna surface what's in the data. So pros and cons. Satoshi, anything you want to add there? Because we are in overtime.
Yeah, real quick. I mean, I think it's important. I think we touched on this a little earlier, but keep in mind that AI isn't magic, right? It's not gonna just give you the answer. And one of our partners, I think, recently said that it's really at the intersection of human intelligence and artificial intelligence where the magic really happens. So I think it's important for businesses to think about the objectives, the workflows, and how they're going to create that environment where the human and the AI can really collaborate to really pull out that those meaningful insights that can really change your business.
Yeah, almost there, you guys. Thanks everyone for holding on. What types of feedback or what type of file types do you work with? Excel and JSON, real easy, a common question we get. And now what? Now what is always talk to us, let us help. Sign up for future webinars. We have a few coming up in January, and I think we have a good lineup in February. So if you have any ideas, suggestions, talk to us. We're happy to help. And I think that I would say questions or comments, but we are over time. Shoot those to us offline. And thank you all for being here, participating. It was good to see you. So, all right.
All right, thank you.
And yeah.